Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to That OA Thing, the podcast where we discuss the latest issues from across the Ombudsman landscape. I'm Donal Galligan, Chief Executive of the Ombudsman Association. This week it's Carers Week, and it's a time to recognise the immense contribution of unpaid carers and to reflect on whether our systems are really supporting them in the way they should. So I'm delighted to be joined today by two colleagues from the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales, Michelle Morris, the Ombudsman, and Sarah Jones, who leads on own initiative investigations, to talk about their investigation into how carers' needs are being met. Well, thank you both for joining us. It's great to have you on. Michelle, let's start with a bit of context. In Wales, your office has the power to launch what are called own initiative investigations. Now, these powers are, of course, an essential tool for a modern ombudsman service. But for any of our listeners who might not be familiar, could you explain what that power is and why it's so important?
Yes, of course. Well, the office was given the power in 2019 when the Senedd, that's the Welsh Parliament, passed the Public Services Ombudsman Wales Act. And the act was intended to make the office more proactive in identifying and investigating issues in regards to public services in Wales, and also to make us more impactful in terms of shaping how complaints are handled right across the Welsh public sector. But also, most importantly, to make us more accessible to those people who might struggle at times to have their voices heard. So the own initiative powers are particularly important for that accessibility. It means that I can launch an investigation without necessarily having to have received a complaint about an issue. And I can launch that investigation where I suspect there is a failure of public service delivery. Now, that power is important because it allows me to investigate issues that could affect those most unlikely to come forward with a complaint. Perhaps they're not able to complain or don't have the confidence to come forward. So, for example, people who are homeless or people who are carers caring for others. And put simply, this own initiative power ensures that their voices can be heard.
That's great. It's fantastic that your office has it, and one as we say that every ombudsman needs to have that kind of power in their arsenal. Sarah, let's turn to the investigation itself, which was called "Are We Caring for Our Carers?" What led you to focus on unpaid carers, and how did this issue come onto your radar?
So carers are legally entitled to a needs assessment if they appear to have needs for support or likely to do so in the future. So if it appears to a local authority that a carer might have support needs, then that local authority has a duty to offer them a carer's needs assessment. A carer can also request a carer's needs assessment if the local authority isn't already aware of their caring role. So we looked at this subject because we receive very few complaints from carers or the people they care for. The focus of the investigation was also informed by our conversations with a third sector organisation called Carers Wales. Carers Wales is part of Carers UK. Carers Wales pointed us to some relevant evidence of issues that were being faced by carers who are engaging with local authorities. And they also facilitated a focus group for us, and that involved people with lived experience of the issues that they'd highlighted to us.
It shows how important that relationship is with external stakeholders, isn't it? And with the advice and advocacy sector to get that intelligence. How did you actually go about the investigation? What was the process? What did it look at, and who was involved?
So for the investigation itself, we selected 4 local authorities that each met the criteria for a known initiative investigation. Those 4 authorities were Caerphilly County Borough Council, Ceredigion County Council, Flintshire County Council, and Neath Talbot Council. Own initiative investigations have a consultation period before we start an investigation. So we launched a consultation on our draft proposal in January 2023. We considered the responses that we received from that consultation. And we then issued a detailed investigation proposal to the 4 local authorities selected for inclusion. Once we'd had time to consider those responses, we decided to investigate, and we started the investigation in June 2023. The investigation considered a large volume and range of evidence, and that included carer population data, documentary evidence from the investigated authorities and their commissioned service providers, evidence from their staff as well, from those who are taking calls through to senior managers. And we also considered evidence from carers with lived experience of having their needs assessed in each of the local authority areas that we considered. And then we published the investigation report in October 2024.
That's really helpful. It just in that little period there, you've shown, just how thorough it is and getting those different perspectives as well. Michelle, for anyone who's seen the report, I think what jumps out, the findings, they do feel quite stark. Could you talk us through what you found in the investigation?
Yeah, well, there was a lot of really important things that came out of the investigation. I suppose the key things for me were that public bodies are not always meeting their statutory obligations, the ones that Sarah just described. So in the councils that we did our investigation in, 10 to 12% of the population over the age of 5 identified themselves as carers, but less than 3% of them has had a needs assessment. Remember, that's a statutory responsibility, so less than 3%. And even fewer, less than 2%, actually had an assessment that led to a support plan. So that really does call us to question whether, they're properly being supported and carers are properly being supported. Following on from that many carers were clearly not aware of their rights and aware of the support that might be available for them in their community. They weren't being fully informed of their rights either when they were having contact with public bodies such as local councils and with health services as well. Thirdly, there was a number of ways that we felt the assessment process could be improved. When they were happening, we felt that there was a lack of information about the process. People weren't clear what the process would be and how they would be asked to participate. That led to carers not knowing what to expect and also not being well informed about the sort of support they might reasonably ask for through that process. So all of that needs to be improved. And I think finally the thing I'd pick up is about collaboration. There's not enough collaboration going on between local councils and health boards and health services to ensure that carers are identified early on and to ensure that they're signposted to make sure they can get assessment and support if they need it. So, some very important recommendations there about how those statutory responsibilities are being fulfilled and the impact that that's having on so many carers across the country.
Yeah, some really fundamental issues, as you say there, across that system. So I just to focus on a little bit, what recommendations did you make off the back of the report? And I guess even more importantly, how are you ensuring they're leading to real change?
Yes, there were a number of really important recommendations. So several were made as a result. So firstly, that point about collaboration. There needs to be an improvement in how different public sector bodies collaborate, local councils and health services in particular. And that's not just hospitals, it's about GPs as well, anyone that's coming into contact with people who have got a caring responsibility. It's at that point they should be identified and signposted to the right services. So it's everyone's responsibility and that system needs to work better. The second area was around local councils making improvements to the assessment process. So for example, I've already touched on some of this, but better information for carers about what they can expect from the process and the role of quite often third parties, organisations that do that work for councils. And communication needs to improve. Communication about the process, but also about the outcome of the process and how people can request a review or challenge the findings of the assessment if they wish to do so. So there's a lot about better preparing people and better communicating with them. Then there was an area around quality assurance because we felt the councils weren't really clear whether their processes were working properly, and they need to put in place regular audits to have better quality assurance so they can satisfy themselves that they're properly, consistently and fairly applying the assessment process to carers right across their areas.
I'm just wondering, has there been any feedback from people on the ground to those recommendations? I suppose particularly from carers themselves.
Yeah, we've had some good feedback. It's early days because the report was only published last autumn, we certainly had a good response and a positive response from Welsh Government, because they already have a task and finish group underway to look at how carers can be better supported in Wales. So there's clear government priority around this. We've also had good feedback from the third sector, who represent carers, and they're using the findings to continue to campaign for change and improvement for the sector. Clearly, we're going to monitor compliance, the recommendations we made that those local councils are now required to fulfil. We will monitor compliance on that, and I'll be doing a follow-up report later this year. So we'll certainly, through that process, try to look at how that lived experience for carers may have changed, hopefully improved during that period.
Yeah, fingers crossed on that, and it would be great to hear more. What when you do look back on this and see, hopefully the improvements that have been made, but what might have changed. One of the things I was just thinking about when we were talking about this was, to me, the similarities perhaps between this investigation and your other own initiative investigation into homelessness, in the sense of the very low or non-existent complaints to begin with, the things that were discovered around the lack of awareness of people of their rights and what they're entitled to. Thinking about those two own initiative investigations your office has done, what do you think it tells us about own initiative powers and how and when they should be used?
I think our work so far shows that there's a real value in being able to investigate issues which affect those that are least able or willing to come forward and complain. And I think we've used our powers well in focusing on homelessness and carers. Without those powers that were given to my office, then those voices would remain silent, that we wouldn't have been able to do that work because we simply don't see the complaints coming forward from them. So, I think that's the real power of own initiative. It gives me that scope as Ombudsman to look at areas where I suspect and where there is evidence of public sector failure, but I'm not reliant on someone coming forward with a complaint. I think the other way to use the powers that we've done a lot of over the last 2 years is that we've extended investigations as well. So we can do these wider investigations as we've done on homelessness and carers, but we can also extend investigations that are currently underway. So if someone does bring me a complaint and we look at that complaint and think, actually, we'd like to go a bit further to find out a bit more about what's been going on here, then we can do that by extending those investigations. And again, that's the own initiative power. My office couldn't do that before 2019. We've done that several times over the last 2 years. I think 10 different reports. Most importantly, we've been able to identify injustice that was not evident from the complaint itself, because we were able to go a bit further with our investigation. An example, this has led to 2 public interest reports into health services in 2 different health boards in Wales, which have identified systemic issues and made important recommendations for improvement. If we hadn't had the own initiative powers, we wouldn't have been able to publish those public interest reports.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because as you've clearly set out the benefits of those powers, and I think sadly elsewhere in these islands and more broadly, we perhaps have stakeholders who are not convinced that these kind of powers are needed. So I think it's so great to see the examples, as you say. You're not using these as fishing expeditions. There's a reason, there's a logic behind it, and sadly it's showing up things that do need to be improved. But as you say, without those powers, perhaps never would have come up at all.
Not at all.
Really interesting. Look, thank you both for joining us and for your work, particularly on this vital issue. But before we wrap up, it is Carers Week. So a question to both of you, really. What would you like our listeners to reflect on?
I think for me, it's about being proactive. So public service staff need to be aware of carers' rights and use that knowledge then in their roles to proactively identify carers, sharing with those carers information about their rights and the services that may be available to them, including their right to a carer's needs assessment.
Thanks, Sarah. Michelle, any kind of thoughts that you think our listeners should reflect on?
Yeah, my main reflection from this is about the missed opportunities that are happening every day right across Wales. So we've got a small number of, or a small proportion of carers receiving assessments and support plans. And what that means is we're missing opportunities for early intervention to support them and to support their families. Inevitably, what's going to happen if people don't get the right level of support at an early stage is that there's going to be more pressure placed on public services, because inevitably, not in all cases, but many cases, those carers and their families will reach crisis point because they don't have that support. And we're in a vicious circle then of more pressure being placed on health services and social services, which we know are already under pressure. So there's real opportunities for early intervention, preventative action here, which sadly are being missed.
Really important message to end on. Again, thank you both very much for joining us, Michelle and Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you.
To our listeners, as ever, thank you for tuning in. We'll include a link to the full PSOW report and relevant resources in the episode description. We have, of course, today been talking about the situation specifically in Wales, but wherever you are, if you're a carer or if you know someone who is, please do seek out and make use of the support that carers are entitled to in your area. Don't forget, you can follow us on LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and Threads under Ombudsman Association. Do subscribe to That OA Thing on Spotify or YouTube so you don't miss future episodes. Particularly this week, let's remember the carers around us and work together to support them better. And hopefully you'll join us again next time.